Okay, good morning, all participants. Welcome to the fourth installation of Jobs and Skills Insights webinar, presented to you by SkillsFuture Singapore in partnership with Burning Glass Technologies today. The topic that we will be covering today will be skills, not jobs, pathways to success in the emerging job landscape. Our guest speaker for today will be from the CEO of Burning Glass, Mr. Matt Sigelman. So Matt has been leading Burning Glass Technologies for more than a decade. He actually holds an MBA from Harvard. And to have some information on Burning Glass Technologies, Burning Glass Technologies, Burning Glass Technologies delivers job market and analytics that empower employers, workers, and educators to make data-driven decisions. So Burning Glass is reshaping how the labor market works, with data that identify the skills gaps that keep job seekers and employers apart, and tools that enable both sides to bridge that gap and connect more easily. So the company's artificial intelligence technology analyzes hundreds of millions of job postings and real-life career transitions to provide insight into labor market patterns. This real-time strategic intelligence offers crucial insights, such as which jobs are most in demand, the specific skills employers need, and the career directions that offer the highest potential for workers. So, without much further ado, we shall hand the presentation over to Matt. Matt.
Such a pleasure, and thank you so much for the kind introduction, and of course to SkillsFuture for hosting this webinar. It's a pleasure to speak to everyone today, and I thought what I wanted to do today is to provide you a little bit of a window into some of what we've learned from our work. Burning Glass, our work is in taking a big data approach to understanding the job market. We each day analyze millions of job postings the world around, and each year hundreds of millions of people's, real people's career histories through resumes, profiles, and the like, in order to understand what sorts of jobs and skills are in demand, and what's changing in the market. And one of the things that we've learned from all of that data, and just in the past several years, we've analyzed, for example, almost 10 million job postings from Singapore alone. And one of the things that we've learned from all of this big data is that the job market's actually a bit of a misnomer. The job market isn't driven by jobs so much as it's driven by skills. In fact, skills are the DNA of an economy. You look at the sets of skills that are in demand, the sets of skills that are in supply, you can start to get a sense for the nuances of a talent ecosystem. It's a really crucial insight because that the economy is driven by skills more than jobs, because it explains both the kind of diversity of skills within jobs, but it also explains the dynamism of what's going on in the economy, and it provides an explanation for how we can unlock opportunity for workers in the kind of ways that SkillsFuture has been supporting. It's also a very important idea because it helps us to understand what are the skills that need to be developed in a workforce in order to drive national competitiveness. So when we take a look at this skill DNA of jobs from all the big data that we collect, one of the things that we can see most clearly is that the skills that underlie jobs, the skills that define jobs, are in fact changing, and changing very fast. This is what you're seeing here is the results of some analysis from a Harvard economist named David Deming, who has used the Burning Glass data set to be able to track how the skill requirements of jobs have changed over time. And he finds that there are some occupations where literally 40% of the skill requirements in those jobs today are fundamentally different from what they were just a decade ago. Now, stop for a second and think about the tectonic pace with which most labor markets move. And then think about 40% of the requirements of a job changing in the space of just 10 years' time. And you can start to get a sense for the scope of the challenge that this skill dynamism poses. Now, we're used to understanding the fluidity of skills, the dynamism of skills, as really just being an outgrowth of technology change. Skills change because technologies change, and therefore we assume people need to be able to adapt to those new technologies. And there's certainly no small amount of truth to that. But there's actually a force in the job market which is perhaps even more profound. And that's that increasingly we're seeing sets of skills mixed together from across different domains, from across different fields of work. And so you're seeing the DNA, the skill genome of jobs recombining, remixing in ways that change the fundamental nature of those jobs. Essentially, jobs are having sex. Here's two jobs that are both involved in the data economy, both of which are, as you can imagine, have a range of data skills that are required. We see accountants on the left and data scientists on the right. Of course, most of us are much more used to jobs like accountancy, which has been around since the Industrial Revolution. In fact, these two jobs are a worthy comparison because it turns out accountants were the data scientists of the 19th century. Before the Industrial Revolution, most firms were run out of the gold in the proprietor's purse, and so you didn't need abstruse skills like addition and subtraction, let alone long division. And so it was only with industrialization that all of a sudden you needed to have people who were more numerate. Well, these two jobs, though, are worthy of comparison, not just because of their epoch. They're worthy of comparison because when you think about an accounting job, which you see on the left, is that accounting jobs, when you listen to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employers articulate the skill requirements of being an accountant, what you hear pretty resoundingly is that the skills are, not too surprisingly, the skills are accounting skills. When you think about the skills, on the other hand, for a data scientist, and you listen to what employers articulate are the skills you need for that role, well, you would imagine that that role, by title, would need data skills. And you'd be right, but only partly right. A data scientist, as it turns out, needs not just data skills, but also needs programming skills. In fact, needs more programming skills than data skills, but also the business skills to relate the kind of statistical findings back to a business domain. These kinds of jobs that are mixing skills we refer to as hybrid jobs, and we refer to this phenomenon as the emergence of a hybrid job economy. And it turns out the jobs that are hybridizing the fastest are also growing the fastest. They're growing twice as fast as the economy at large. They pay significantly more than others. And so the results of this hybridization bear out in two ways. One is what you see on the left-hand side of your screen. This is the number of these sort of newfangled roles that are starting to appear that didn't exist when many of us were kids, but now are starting to be commonplace. You can see that if you rewind the clock to 2012, there were precisely 13 jobs in Singapore for data scientists. Last year, there were almost 1,000. Likewise, UI, UX designers and developers. There were only 178 of them in 2012. Last year, there were over 700. But the bigger story, as much as you're starting to see the emergence of some new jobs that didn't exist before because of this hybridization of skills, the real impact of hybridization of the job market, the hybridization of skills, is what you see on the right-hand side of the page. In 2012, you look at not at jobs for data scientists, but at jobs that are intensive of data analytic skills, not because we think so, but because employers are articulating it. You see that in 2012, there were only 14 occupations in Singapore which had significant demand for data analytics skills, comprising about 100,000 postings. Last year, that had grown from 14 occupations to 38 occupations, and it almost doubled the scope of the economy that was encompassed by those roles. That's a much more profound demand than the 824 jobs for data scientists. So you can see that increasingly there are sets of jobs that are defining the economy, which are coming to mix skills in ways that our education systems aren't necessarily used to. Just to put that in perspective, what you see here is the full gamut of occupations broken out by their earning quartile. And what you can see is that top earning quartile jobs, of them, spot on half are in occupations with significant demand for coding skills. Now, to be really clear, that does not mean that half of top earning jobs are tech jobs. These are jobs in a lot of cases in marketing, in finance, and life sciences, but where the roles are increasingly requiring people to know how to code. So in order for our students to be able to have access and for workers to continue to have access to the kind of roles that will afford a middle-class lifestyle in the 21st century, increasingly there are sets of skills that are redefining what's baseline to a 21st century economy. Now, it would be easy to think about all of this hybridization as really being about the spread of tech skills and data skills and a range of others that are starting to mix across the economy. And you, again, would only be because here was one of the most fascinating things that we found in our analysis. As much as there's been this tremendous spread of data skills, of tech skills, it turns out the jobs that are most highly hybridized, the ones that are most intensive of data skills, the most intensive of tech skills, are also far and away the most intensive of human skills. So these jobs that are the most hybridized, as an example, have twice the demand of others for teamwork and collaboration skills, more than 3 times the demand for creativity skills, double the demand for research skills, 50% more demand for problem solving and writing skills. So you can see that as jobs become more enabled by technology, the people who are driving technology increasingly need to be able to exert human judgment, to be able to communicate in ways that are very human. And as a result, those jobs that are most hybridized and therefore are most human are also the most irreplaceable. And you can see that they're therefore least vulnerable to automation. So as we think about training and education for the 21st century, it means that we need to be training not just for the technical skills, but we need to make sure that we continue to have a strong soft skill foundation. Indeed, soft skills matter, and they matter across the economy, even in the most technical kinds of roles in ICT careers and healthcare and engineering. Even in those, more than 25% of the skills that employers specify are what you might consider to be soft skills. And here was the other interesting thing that we found from our analysis of soft skills. You see, there's a lot of people who assume that employers don't really mean it, that the soft skills that they specify are just a kind of mush at the bottom of a job posting, things that employers specify because they think it sounds good. But if that were true, what you would expect is that you would see the same sets of skills, the same sets of soft skills specified in every occupation. What you see on the right is that jobs in different areas, perhaps not too surprisingly, demand different sets of soft skills. So as you can see, as an example, that some of the jobs that are most intensive of math skills, where employers see the greatest gaps, the darkness of the squares here reflects how much employers perceive a gap. You'll see that when you look at math skills, you'll see that, for example, some of the biggest gaps aren't necessarily in fields like engineering or finance, but in, for example, customer support, where it's not part of the core training. And as a result, employers are perceiving that they're getting a pipeline of talent that's lacking some of the key foundational skills for the 21st century. So that set us out to define what are those foundational skills for the 21st century. We looked specifically at jobs that are not only in high demand today, but where our projections show that they will continue to be high demand. We looked at jobs that or skills rather, that are common to digitally intensive roles. So when we looked at the new economy, what are the sets of skills that cut across the ICT spectrum and other parts of the new economy, but which, and this is number 3, are already significantly spreading beyond the new economy, that are spreading across the economy overall. And what we came up with was 14 core foundational skill areas. Now, not surprisingly, as we discussed a minute ago, you see significant ongoing demand for human skills. But what you also see, and those are at the bottom of the page, but we also found is that there are sets of digital skills, data skills, and business skills, which are almost equally foundational, which unlock thousands of jobs, which unlock, in a lot of cases, significant pay premiums. These are skills like project management skills, like the ability to communicate data, to be able to analyze data. Whether you are going into the tech economy or whether you're taking a job as an accountant, whether you're taking a job as a nurse, these kinds of skills are increasingly foundational. They are bedrock. And again, we need to make sure that both at the primary and secondary education levels, at tertiary education, in universities, that we continue to build these into a core framework. Now, here was the other interesting thing that came out of our analysis of foundational skills and how they work. By the just sheer word foundation, you would expect that these skills are essentially the bottom of the pyramid. I have in my mind the mental image of the food pyramid, where carbohydrates are at the bottom row of the pyramid, and the important stuff, protein, is at the very top. So we expect that foundational skills sort of provide the bedrock, but actually what employers value is technical skills. It turned out that the economy works almost exactly the opposite. That the further north that somebody goes in her career, the more senior she becomes, the more advanced the role that she's undertaking. In fact, the more intensive the relative value is that employers place on foundational skills. That's true across foundational skills across the board. It's true of human skills. It's especially true of business enabling skills, but also true of digital skills. So the further and more advanced you become in your career, the more these core essentials are in fact exactly that, essential. Not surprisingly then, skills come to be significant. These kinds of foundational skills come to unlock value for workers in their careers as they try to move up beyond technical roles. Here you can see in the example of engineering and ICT professionals, you can see the skill premiums, how much extra you get paid for having some fairly basic business and leadership skills. People, for example, who are engineers, who have the ability to create a project budget, get paid 11% more than those who don't. Those who can actually make an effective presentation get paid 15% more than those who can't. And the list goes on from there. So the question then is, how do we focus on what are the most important skills for a role? It turns out that certain sets of skills are sometimes neglected as we develop training curricula. You see, the sets of skills that we tend to focus on are the skills which are most defining of a role. Here you're seeing the sets of skills that define, that are in demand for graphic designers. And in the top right corner of this chart, you see what we call core skills. These are skills that are essentially graphic design skills and that are in demand across most graphic design jobs. They are high frequency and they're high specificity. And what you're seeing here is a set of skills like various Adobe Suite skills, web design, graphic design, visual design. Well, you don't need a lot of fancy data to tell you that. But here's the thing. What we tend to forget about instead is two other categories. On the one side, we see what we call building block skills. In a lot of cases, these aren't graphic design skills at all. These are skills like budgeting or project management. That makes sense. Graphic designers are doing project-based work. And so, not surprisingly, to do project-based work, you need project management skills and budgeting skills. But here's the problem. Most graphic design training programs that you might take in a polytechnic or other tertiary education programs, in many cases, they neglect those sets of skills. Similarly, what you see on the top left are sets of skills which are specialized, but are only required in some graphic design jobs. These are what we call differentiating or distinguishing skills. These are places where it's possible for where you're going to see specialization, where you're going to see skill emergence, where you're going to see jobs changing at the leading edge. And this is the opportunity to really make sure that students graduate out of training programs ahead of the game. You can see this bear out in how skills define which jobs, even within a given role, turn out to be better paying. Here's an example of marketing managers. And you can see that there's some sets of skills that associate themselves disproportionately with lower paying jobs. If you're going to ask a marketing person to be able to do Photoshop or to do customer service or Facebook, it's probably not a very advanced job, even if it has the title of marketing manager. Conversely, if you want to train somebody for the kind of marketing manager role that pays really well, that gets a significant premium, make sure that that person not only has core marketing skills, but that she has product marketing skills, that she has product development skills, that she has strategy skills and thought leadership skills. Those are the ones that will create the differentiation for workers and learners. So as we think about what are the skills that a program needs to focus on, come up with a fairly straightforward framework. You can see here, we look at how hard jobs are and skills are to fill today. And then we've created a set of models which turn out to be startlingly accurate that forecast how much various skills will grow in demand. We can do that both overall or within specific sets of jobs. And so what you see here is that there are sets of skills that employers already struggle to find and which are growing really fast. Those are the sets of skills which are disruptive because they have the potential to upend the apple cart, so to speak. They have the potential to cause significant issues for employers in being able to develop the right kind of skill pipeline. Let's look at how that plays out in the world of data science skills. We think of data science, we saw before, data science skills are growing super fast, so one would expect that the whole skill spectrum of data science skills should be in this top right disruptive quadrant. But in fact, what you can see here is that there are some data science skills that are more disruptive than others. You can see that those are the ones, therefore, that as we think about building curricula, as we think about building and investing in training, as we think about guiding workers to the kind of skills that can unlock the most value for them, we can see how this can be really a very effective framework for bringing focus. Overall, skills drive significant value for workers, but they also are changing the way that employers themselves work. And they reflect new conceptions of work that employers need to stay current with. This is an example of two automobile manufacturing companies, both of which hire a lot of mechanical engineers. GM on the right and Tesla on the left. And as you can see here, there is a fair amount of skill overlap that's marked in blue in terms of the skill requirements that each company has for their roles. But you can also see that each company is overemphasizing certain sets of skills relative to the other. For GM, those sets of skills are about core systems engineering, engineering support, even things like Microsoft Excel. For Tesla, these are skills like product design, product development, 3D modeling, data analysis. They're the same job by title, but you can see that there is enough of a different accent that you can start to see that it's a different conception of work. That's useful for employers to keep mind to as they think about how to make sure that the workforce they have will be the workforce they need in the future, and how they can invest in skill development to make sure that their workforce stays current. But it's also very useful in ensuring that we're developing the sets of skills that will ensure that the sectors that are most important in Singapore stay competitive as well. And here you can see how looking at skill forecasts can help us stay ahead of the curve. Overall, cybersecurity skills are growing incredibly fast, and they're in very high demand and short supply. But the sets of skills that are cybersecurity skills that are most demanded today aren't actually the ones that are growing the very fastest. The ones that are growing fastest aren't about securing networks. They're increasingly about securing environments. So you can see IoT network security, cloud security, public cloud security, and a range of other cloud security, data protection, and a range of others. As data is moving to the cloud, the kind of skills needed to secure those data are also changing. And you can see that reflected. Being able to track that means that we can stay ahead of it, which means that we can make sure that that talent supply is there to support the growth of industry. And that also takes the form of being able to track emerging sectors, which aren't necessarily well understood. In this case, we can see the spread of demand by sectors and across occupations for augmented reality and virtual reality careers. Now, the way in which most of us think about qualifying for jobs, about proving the skills that we have, is through degrees. But when we think about a hybrid job economy, one of the things that's one of the key features of that hybridization is that jobs are picking up individual sets of skills. And so as a result, workers need to be able to have more responsive ways of qualifying for themselves, qualifying themselves for work, than degrees themselves. In this case, you're looking at statistics from the US about the demand for MBA degrees. And you can see that overall MBAs get paid some good money, about $85,000 US a year. But you can see there are whole sets of MBA skills which actually pay more than the MBA itself. So in other words, the MBA is worth less than the sum of its parts. That's not surprising in a hybrid job market, because it says that individual skills can actuate and unlock the career mobility of people. And so we need to make sure that people have access to those sets, the ability to acquire individual skills on the fly and to be able to validate those skills. And again, it's one of the reasons why the investment that Singapore has made in SkillsFuture is so incredibly important and world leading. When you think about the ability to acquire an individual skill and to be able to use that as a mechanism for mobility, whether that be income mobility, social mobility, or the like, we can start to realize that skills and learning itself is one of the most incredible opportunities that people have to arbitrage. And in fact, it is perhaps the only opportunity that we have to arbitrage in ourselves. You remember back from that introductory economics course, don't you? Buy low, sell high, arbitrage. Well, somebody who is a human resources professional who's making $36,000 a year, who acquires project management skills, makes not $36,000 a year, but she makes $60,000 a year. It doesn't cost $24,000 to learn project management. Buy low, sell high. And so skill development becomes a very important part of how we affect worker mobility. And it also enables companies to be able to arbitrage in their workforces, to be able to increase the value of their human capital in ways out of proportion to the investment itself. That's also a very important mechanism for being able to affect a range of other kinds of mobility as well. We've done a bunch of work for the World Economic Forum tracking how you can apply the similarity of skills between jobs to being able to help move people out of the path of automation, and to take people whose jobs are at high displacement risk and to move them into jobs that are higher paying, but which, without having to train people up from scratch, without having to say that, okay, we have to to make a whole new transition, but instead just to train the skill difference between the job they're in and lower automation risk jobs. The same is true, though, of being able to unlock greater opportunities for women and others in the economy. This is, I'll give you an example. Mobile app developers are a great job. They are, in the US, and I imagine probably not that dissimilar in Singapore, only 9% women. 9%. Now, worth noting, definitely not the same job, but web designers are 52% women. The difference in skills between a web designer role and a web developer role is not that huge. You go from 52% women to 21% women. From web developers to mobile app developers is, again, a trainable gap. Go from 21% women to 9% women. And in the course of making those sets of transitions, you see literally a doubling in wage between a web designer and a mobile app developer. So this can also be a mechanism not only for enabling people to invest in themselves, but also for us to be able to increase the scope of opportunity available to all Singaporeans and to everyone across the world. We're used to a universe where skill development, where learning is something that happens in our education in primary school and secondary school, in tertiary school, perhaps in university. And we then embark upon careers, and whatever we're learning we do, we assume from that point on we just do in our jobs. In a hybrid job economy, once we have the core foundational skills, it becomes incumbent on people to be able to acquire skills on the fly as they continue along their career track. Having that infrastructure ensures that people stay valuable, ensures that sectors stay competitive, ensures that the nation itself remains a place that puts people and their capital right at the center. I'd be delighted to take your questions.
Hey, thank you, Matt, for that very insightful presentation. Yeah, participants you are able to table any questions regarding Matt's presentation. There is a button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. So you can use that to table any of the questions since all your microphones are mute. And so far, I think we have had one question, which is, I think, pertinent to burning glass technology subscribers. So the question is, will burning glass technologies be making data that reveals differentiating and future skills by role or industry or via region? As this will be valuable to subscribers because it provides input for workforce analytics.
Yes, we're looking forward to rolling out some of the kinds of models that I showed in Singapore, and actually that's very much on our product roadmap. We're finding that these models are incredibly powerful, and they're powerful because they're simple, they're easy to use and easy to understand, and yet they focus people's attention on the kinds of skills that we need to make sure we build in, but which are all too easy to forget.
Yeah, so Matt, you were mentioning about this foundational skills earlier on. Can you have some idea that, can you give us some idea about how these new foundational skills will fit into a traditional liberal arts program?
I think it's a great question. As you can imagine, actually, in an arts program, the foundational skills are what is the bedrock of that program. The real question there is in some ways actually almost the opposite, which is how do we make sure that in an arts program for somebody who goes to university, studies, let's say history or political science or literature, how do we make sure that that student is also acquiring sets of skills that will make him valuable to the job market? because often students finish up in those kinds of programs. They can write really well, they can research really well, they've got great critical thinking skills. But what we know from our analysis is that employers are expecting people to have both. Showed you some examples before of how employers perceive real gaps around foundational skills. But employers are also very articulate about their need for people to bring to bear technical skills. And that's in no small part because we know that this generation of workers tends to stick around in their first job a little bit less than people perhaps in past generations did. And so it's hard for the notion that an employer can take a university graduate and that graduate's just going to and then invest in them over the course of many years is hard to justify when that person might leave within a year or a year and a half. So as a result, it becomes incumbent on students and it becomes incumbent on universities themselves to track what are the sets of technical skills that unlock the value of those foundational skills. And what we find is that there are a range of skills which are not hard for a university student to acquire either through non-departmental courses or perhaps through online learning, which unlock a lot of jobs and which usually unlock significant pay premiums. These are not hard skills. In a lot of cases, skills like social media analysis or graphic design or light coding skills, certainly statistical software skills can unlock the value of a degree and can open up a lot more job opportunity than you would have just with an arts degree. I'll give you an example. If you look at the demand for students who finish a degree course in psychology, a lot of people assume that they will go on to advanced study in psychology and eventually become a doctoral candidate in psychology and practice, in clinical practice. But of course, most students who study psychology actually never progress on to advanced studies. Now, if you look at how much they make, at least for data I've seen in other countries, they do okay, not great. A psychology student, on the other hand, who in the course of her research picks up R or SAS or SPSS to be able to analyze, let's say, the findings from some survey research that she's done. That student makes more than 50% more than other psychology students. So it's, in other words, the prescription here is not abandon the arts, which I think a lot of people have said, look, do the arts continue to have relevance in the 21st century? The arts are very relevant because they deliver the kind of core foundational skills. But the real question is, how do we what are the few additional skills that really ensure that that student not only has a great foundation, they've got the ability to land into a strong first job and to progress up from there.
Thank you, Matt. We have another question. It's about the validity of burning glass data. So I believe that burning glass data is only as good as the details posted in the jobs. So I would say that if job postings do not indicate skills properly, then will it affect the data that Burning Glass collects and also analyzes and presents?
So it's a good question. Let me put it this way. Any given job posting is defective, full stop. I've yet to meet across over 1 billion job postings. I've yet to come across a job posting that I thought was perfectly written. Sure, they exist, but I haven't seen them. But here's the wonderful thing about the law of numbers, is when you look across 1 billion job postings, what you find is that the noise tends to, all the sort of imperfections tend to come out, tend to cancel out. But employers tend to be actually quite consistent about the sets of skills that they actually need. And so it becomes a very important lens in not only providing data in a more timely way than typical data series enable, but enabling a much greater level of granularity and in ways that are validated by expert analysis and the like. So we can kind of see the things that we're seeing in real-time data series like burning glass data bear out in what we hear from experts as well. And that's why these data are used by a range of governments and researchers across the world. They're used by the OECD. They're used by the World Economic Forum. They're used by researchers at places like Harvard and Yale and University of Pennsylvania and London School of Economics, and a range of other uses like that, because by the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank, precisely because they provide much greater and much more valid granularity than traditional methods have allowed.
Thank you. I believe we have time for one last question, but nonetheless, the other questions will be answered offline. We will table the other questions which we are not able to answer now during this webinar session to Matt, and he will answer them offline, and then we will share them with basically the people who have raised the questions. And the last question will be, in terms of this data, how many companies have Burning Glass surveyed to obtain the results of the rising skills in demand?
I'm sorry, how many companies?
I'll think that basically I would say that because you have mentioned that there are rising skills in demand, but in terms of the data, what are the sources of data, and what would be the count of this data? As in, how many companies have you gotten this response from, or the
so great question, and so our data are not based on surveys, and that's why they're so much more timely and so much more comprehensive. We go out and scrape each day from almost 50,000 different websites, the job postings by which employers are articulating what they need. Now, as you can imagine, we go out to most of the job boards you can think of, but more importantly, the significant majority of the sites that we visit and retrieve jobs from are employer sites themselves. And we bring back all those jobs and use those as a signal of what's going on in the economy. And that's why we can literally have a view of the economy as today. It's why we can look at so much detail about the skill requirements, because we're not waiting for employers to volunteer that information. We know what they're signaling to the market, and we're seeing what they're asking for job seekers to bring with them. And that provides a whole new set of insights as in the developed world, in places like Singapore, the significant majority of jobs are in fact posted online.
Okay, thank you, Matt, for taking time out of your busy schedule to share this very valuable job skills insights, and also for responding to the questions raised by participants. For the participants' information, Matt just reached home after a 2-hour flight delay, so thank you very much, Matt, once again for your time. And for the rest of the participants, if there are any other questions you would like to table to Matt, which you are not able to think of now, you can always send it to us at this email address, ssgwebinar@gmail.com, and we will forward the questions to Matt and his team and get back to you on the questions. Thank you very much, Matt, for your time.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation, and please feel free to reach out with any questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Have a good day.
Have a good day. Have a good night.